Okay, good evening. Welcome to the last stream for The Secret History of the World. Not the last stream for this series, but the last stream for this book. We are done. And I put out a poll on X just a little while ago with 4 books on it. So if you get a chance, go on over there and vote on the one that you like or write something in if you have something else you'd rather have me read. All right. So, 2 chapters to go tonight, and we'll be done. So, chapter 27, the multi part title is The Mystic Death of Humanity, Swedenborg and Dostoevsky, Wagner, Freud, Jung, and the Materializing of Esoteric Thought, The Occult Roots of Modernism, Occult Bolshevism, and Gandhi. Those are all the things he's going to try to cover in this one chapter. I've noticed he kind of tends to get a little wrapped around the weeds on some. The good news about erectile dysfunction is that it can be cured with diet and exercise. The hard part is getting your wife to diet and exercise. I'm sure there are some wives that will not appreciate that joke, but all right, here we go. Early romanticism's joy in self expression, in animal joy at being alive in the natural world, gave way to disquiet. The greatest of the German philosophers of idealism, Hegel, or Hegel, Hegel, recognized this force in history. Quote, the spirit cheats us, the spirit intrigues, the spirit lies, the spirit triumphs, end quote. Taken as an account of humanity's interior life, the literature of the second half of the 19th century reveals a terrible darkening, a spiritual crisis. If materialist history explains this crisis as alienation, esoteric history sees a spiritual crisis. In other words, it sees a crisis caused by spirits, or more particularly, by demons. The great exponent of this view was not someone revered in academia like Hegel, or even the more frankly occultist Schopenhauer, but a man who rolled around the mud. Swedenborg saw demonic forces rising up from the depths. He prophesied that humanity would have to come to terms with the demonic in the world and inside himself. Today, the Swedenborg Church is the only esoteric movement admitted to Sweden's National Council of Churches, and Swedenborg's teachings remain influential on exponents of communal living, particularly on American groups such as the Shakers. In his own way, however, he was a rather more dangerous figure. Swedenborg's exceptionally detailed and accurate clairvoyance made him world famous. The spiritualists tried to claim him as one of their own. Swedenborg repudiated them, saying that his supernatural gifts were unique to him and heralded the dawn of a new age. It was from his reading of Swedenborg's Heaven and Hell that Goethe had derived his sense of the intrusion of evil, supernatural forces that afflicted Faust. It was from Swedenborg that Baudelaire derived his notion of correspondences, and that Balzac took his notions of the supernatural in Seraphita. But perhaps Swedenborg's most important and far reaching influence was on Dostoevsky, an influence that would darken the mood of an entire era. Dostoevsky's heroes are poised over an abyss. There's always a heightened awareness of how much our choices matter, and also that our choices come to us in different disguises. In Dostoevsky, we counter the paradoxical notion that those who confront this evil, supernatural dimension, even if they are thieves, prostitutes, and murderers, are closer to heaven than those whose cozy worldview deliberately shuts evil out and denies it's it is there. Sorry. Eastern Orthodox Christianity had been less dogmatic than its Western counterpart, and it had valued individual spiritual experience more. Raised in this church, Dostoevsky felt free to explore the outer limits of spiritual experience, to describe battles between the forces of darkness and the forces of light that were taking place in realms of which most people are barely conscious. Dostoevsky's journey through hell, like Dante's, is partly a spiritual journey, but it is also a journey through the hell on earth that humanity has created. There is in Dostoevsky a new impulse which would come to characterize the arts in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the desire to know the worst that can happen. On Dostoevsky's death, his library was discovered to be well stocked with Swedenborg, including his accounts of the many different hells that people with different capacities for evil fashioned for themselves. Swedenborg's accounts of the hells he visited are not fictional. They elude our conventional ontologies, our everyday working assumptions of what is real and what is not. Hell may at first appear no different from the world we live in, but then gradually anomalies show themselves. We might meet a group of genial and amusing men, libertines who love to deflower virgins, but they turn to greet us, and we see that they are, quote, like apes with a fierce face, a horrible countenance, end quote. Non-esoteric schools of literary criticism have missed the way that passages like the following from Crime and Punishment come straight from Swedenborg. Okay, so this is a bit of dialogue from Crime and Punishment, so I'm just going to read the lines out as best I can here. I don't believe in the future life, said Raskolnikov. Svidrigailov sat lost in thought. And what if there are only spiders there, or something of that sort, he said suddenly. He is a madman, thought Raskolnikov. We always imagine eternity as something beyond our conception, something vast, vast. But why must it be vast? Instead of that, what if it's one little room, like a bathhouse in the country, black and grimy and spiders in every corner, and that's all eternity is? I sometimes fancy it like that. Can it be you can imagine nothing juster and more comforting than that? Raskolnikov cried with a feeling of anguish. Juster, and how can we tell perhaps that is just, and do you know it's what I would certainly have made it, answered Svidrigailov with a vague smile. This horrible answer sent a cold chill through Raskolnikov. Wow, that's easier read in your head than out loud. Um, that's the end of um, that passage, by the way. Similarly, in The Brothers Karamazov, when Ivan has a nightmare in which he is visited by the devil, neither Ivan nor the reader believes that this is just a delusion. Dostoevsky is telling his readers that devils may squeeze through into the material dimension. Oh, it looks like we might be going into an ad. So I would, well, let's see. I'll just keep reading. No other single writer so powerfully conveys the undercurrents of evil that welled up in the second half of the 19th century. His work is pervaded with a sense of vital contact with other mysterious worlds, some of them hellish. There is, too, the spiritual extremism, the sense that there is no middle way, that if you do not run to embrace the most spiritual, the demonic will fill the vacuum. Those who try to follow the middle way are nowhere. Like Swedenborg, who looked forward to a new age, but in Dostoevsky's case, this grew out of a very Russian sense of history. Okay, hasn't started an ad, so it says we're back from the ad that never played. So I don't know what to say about that. Okay. Quote, "Every day I go into the grove," wrote the poet Nikolai Kilyov in a letter to a friend, "and sit there by a little chapel and the age-old pine tree. I think about you. I kiss your eyes and your heart. O mother wilderness, paradise of the spirit. How hateful and black seems all the so-called civilized world, and what I would give, what Golgotha would I bear so that America should not encroach upon the blue feathered dawn, upon the fairy tale hut, Western Christianity, among whose heedless gifts in the world we must count rationalism, materialism, a technology that enslaves, an absence of spirit, and in its place a vain sentimental humanism." End quote. This is the Russian perspective. Excuse me. Orthodox Christianity had taken a different path from Roman Christianity. Orthodoxy preserved and nurtured the esoteric doctrines, some of them pre-Christian, that Rome had discarded or declared heretical. The mystical vision of Dionysius the Areopagite continued to illumine Orthodox Christianity with its emphasis on direct personal experience of the spirit worlds. In the 7th century, the Byzantine theologian Maximus the Confessor wrote urging disciplined introspection, the monastic or wandering life. Quote, "Illumination must be sought," he wrote, "and in extreme cases the whole body will be illumined too." End quote. The same phenomena was reported by the monks of Mount Athos. Monks deep in prayer would suddenly illuminate their entire cave or cell. This was a vision of God, the hesychast, which could be achieved by rhythmic breathing exercises, repetitive prayers, and meditation on icons. Excuse me. In Russia, the church emphasized supernatural powers attained after severe spiritual discipline. But then in the 17th century, the Russian Orthodox Patriarch Nikon, Nikon, that's what it looks like, reformed and centralized the church. It was left to the old believers, Raskolniki, to keep the beliefs and spiritual disciplines of the early Christians alive. Their outlawed communities were driven underground, where they survived as a living tradition. Dostoevsky kept in touch with them throughout his life. Okay, so then we have a picture and a caption. Damn it. Hold on. I don't know why I suddenly got a frog in my throat, but I think I got rid of it. All right, so the caption reads, "Illustration to Wagner's Lohengrin. No other esoteric artist so conveys that central esoteric doctrine, the sense of impending and overwhelming destiny. Wagner wrote of his ambition to bring a non-existent world into being. The Baudelaire described how, and Baudelaire described how watching Lohengrin induced in him an altered state of consciousness in which the ordinary world of the senses became dissolved. The occultist Theodore Roos claimed he had known Wagner and that this gave him special insight into a secret doctrine concealed in Parsifal. Roos saw the closing words of Parsifal at the end of Act 3, where he stands holding his lance erect as a glorious deification of the sex drive. Okay, so that is the caption. Here is the picture. Kind of hard to make anything out, honestly. I mean, there's the guy, the spear, or no, it looks like a sword, honestly, to me, in his hand, like he's about to stab it into something. This looks like a tentacle or something back here. Someone has fallen down there. Their legs are in the air. Hard to make out. It would be better to see the full sized or the full color of that picture. Okay. Out of the old believer tradition came the straniki, or wanderers, solitary individuals who renounced money, marriage, passports, and all official documents as they moved across the country, promising ecstatic visions, healing, and prophecy. If caught, they were tortured, sometimes beheaded. Another later movement, which came out of the old believer tradition, was the Clicist, Clicist, no, Cleisti, the people of God, a persecuted underground society famous for its extreme asceticism and rejection of the world. They were reputed to meet at night, sometimes in a forest clearing lit by banks of candles. Naked under flowing white robes, they danced in two circles, the men in an inner circle in the direction of the sun, and the women in an outer circle moving in the other direction, widdershins, counterclockwise. The aim of this ceremony was liberation from the material world and ascent into the spirit worlds. They would collapse, speak in tongues, heal the sick, and cast out demons. There were rumors of orgies at these midnight meetings, but more likely they, like the Cathars, were sexual ascetics, practicing the sublimation of sexual energies for spiritual and mystical purposes. The young Rasputin stayed at the Orthodox monastery of Verkhoturia, where he met members of the Kleisti. His own doctrine seems to have been a radical development proposing spiritual ecstasy attained through sexual exhaustion. The flesh would be crucified, the little death of orgasm would become the mystic death of initiation. After a vision of Mary in which she told him to take up the life of a wanderer, Rasputin walked 2,000 miles to Mount Athos. He returned home 2 years later, exuding a powerful magnetism and displaying miraculous powers of healing. In 1903, he arrived at St. Petersburg, where he was taken up by the personal confessor to the royal family, who said, quote, "It is the voice of the Russian soil which speaks through him." End quote. He introduced Rasputin to a court already fascinated by esoteric ideas and eager for experience. Martinism was already much discussed in Russia's Freemasonic lodges. Maître de Philippe and Pappas had visited the Russian court in 1901. Pappas made Nicholas II the head of a Martinist lodge and acted as the Tsar's healer and spiritual advisor. He is said to have conjured up the spirit of the Tsar's father, Alexander III, who prophesied the death of Nicholas II at the hands of revolutionaries. Pappas also warned the Tsar against the evil influence of Rasputin. Rasputin would be slandered and murdered by Freemasons, but in 1916, his contemporary, the great initiate Rudolf Steiner, said to him, quote, "The Russian folk spirit can now work through him alone and through no one else." End quote. If, as we move towards the fin de siècle, I don't know what that is, Siecle, siècle, I'm not sure. We look not at the very highest rung of art and literature, but at the next rung down. We find a literature of explicit occult themes that would dominate popular culture in the 20th century. Oscar Wilde was steeped in the lore. I think that's supposed to be steeped in the lore of the Order of the Golden Dawn. His The Picture of Dorian Gray, like Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, brought the occult notion of the doppelganger into the stream of public consciousness. M.R. James, the Cambridge Don, who has some claims to be the father of the ghost story, translated many of the apocryphal Gospels into English, gave a lecture on the occult sciences to the Eton Literary Society, and wrote a story called Mount Magnus, in which the Count, an alchemist, goes on a pilgrimage to the birthplace of the Antichrist, a city called Chorazin. The fact that Corazon, or Chorazon, um, if that was Corazon, then he's saying Corazon, is uh, is the name of one of the demons who held lengthy conversations with Dee and Kelly suggests James knew what he was talking about. Earlier in the century, Frankenstein's monster had been a fictionalized account of Paracelsus's homunculus. Attending the same house party as Mary Shelley when she conceived of the monster, Byron's friend Polidori wrote an early vampire story, but of course the most famous version is Bram Stoker's, in which the preserved body in the tomb is a sort of demonic version of Christian Rosenkreutz. Stoker himself was a member of the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, a secret society practicing ceremonial magic. The Czech theosophist Gustav Meyrink would explore a similar theme in his novel The Golem, which in its turn influenced German expressionist cinema. It is said that in the novel La Basse, uh, Huysmans spoke of what had really happened at black magic rituals from personal experience, breaking his oath of secrecy. Aleister Crowley, or Crowley, however you prefer, noted with evident approval that he died of cancer and the tongue as a result. In art, explicit occult themes can be seen in the symbolism of Gustave Moreau, Arnold Böcklin, and Franz von Stuck. In Max Klinger's Waking Dreams, in the weird, erotic occult art of Felicien Rops, whom a critic of the day dubbed a sarcastic Satan, Odilon Redon wrote of, quote, surrendering himself to secret laws, end quote. Throughout this period, the spirit of materialism was working for victory, devising materialistic versions of esoteric philosophy. We have already touched on the way that esoteric ideas of the evolution of the species appeared in materialistic form in Darwin's theories. We have seen, too, how the ruthless and cynical manipulators of the Freemasons, the Illuminati, provided a methodology for revolutionaries in the late 18th and 19th centuries. Now, Marx's dialectical materialism translated the spiritual ideals of Saint Germain onto a purely economic plane. Occultism also played a part in the development of Freud's ideas. His mentor, Charcot, had in turn been taught by the prominent occultist and inventor of mesmerism, Anton Mesmer. The young Freud studied the Kabbalah and wrote approvingly of telepathy, speculating that it might have been an archaic form of communication used by everyone before the invention of language. He introduced into mainstream thought an idea that is essentially Kabbalistic, the idea of consciousness having a structure. For example, the model of the mind that Freud popularized of superego, ego, and id can be seen as a materialized version of the tripartite Kabbalistic model. Indeed, at an even more basic level, the very notion that there are impulses independent of our point of consciousness, but which may impinge upon it from outside, is a secularized, materialistic version of the esoteric account of consciousness. In Freud's scheme of life, these hidden forces should be interpreted as sexual rather than spiritual. Freud later reacted against the esoteric roots of his ideas and stigmatized as mad the ancient form of consciousness out of which they had grown. The esoteric influences on Freud's pupil Jung are even clearer. We have touched on how he interpreted alchemical processes as descriptions of psychological healing and how he identified what he saw as the seven great archetypes of the collective unconscious with the symbolism of seven planetary gods. Okay, then we have another picture, and it's just titled Salome by Gustave Moreau, or Salome. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine if you speak the language. So there we go. All right, back to the reading. By interpreting the alchemical processes as purely psychological, he was denying a level of meaning intended by the alchemical writers, that these mental exercises can influence matter in a supernatural manner. And though Jung saw the seven archetypes as acting independently of the conscious mind, he would have he would have stopped short of seeing them as disembodied centers of consciousness acting completely independently of the human mind. Indeed, when Jung met Rudolf Steiner, he dismissed him as a schizophrenic. But late in life, Jung's work with the experimental physicist Wolfgang Pauli encouraged him to take a few steps beyond the pale. Jung and Pauli came to believe that in addition to the purely physical mechanism of atom knocking against atom, there is another network of connections that binds together events not physically connected, non-physical causal connections brought about by mind. Jung's contemporary, the French anthropologist Henri Corbin, was researching the spiritual practices of the Sufis at this time. Corbin came to the conclusion that the Sufi adepts worked in concert and could communicate with one another in a realm of quote unquote objective imagination. Jung coined the same phrase independently. Later in life, the materialistic explanations that Freud had been trying to force onto spiritual experiences also sprang back at him, and he became plagued by a sense of what he called the uncanny. Freud wrote his essay on the uncanny when he was 62. By thinking about what he feared most, he was trying to stop it happening. A few years earlier, he had experienced the number 62 coming at him insistently. A hat check ticket, a hotel room number, a train seat number. It had seemed to him that the cosmos was trying to tell him something. Perhaps he would die at the age of 62? In the same essay, he described the experience of walking round a maze of streets in an old Italian town and finding himself in the red light district. He took what he thought would be the most direct route out of this district, but soon found himself back in the middle of it. This seemed to happen to him again and again, no matter which direction he took. The experience can only remind us of Francis Bacon. It was as if a maze were changing shape to keep the wanderer from finding the way. As a result of these experiences, Freud began to suspect that there might be some complicity between his psyche and the cosmos, or perhaps the cosmos was manufacturing meanings independently of any human agency and, as it were, beaming them at him. If Freud had been forced to admit that either of these had been the case, even if in only one instance, then his whole materialistic worldview would have been smashed into pieces. Freud was naturally anxious to block these promptings. They left him in a disturbed state of mind. The European colonization of other parts of the world prompted a flow of esoteric ideas in the other direction, a reverse colonization of Europe. The British Empire in India led to the publication in English of esoteric Hindu texts, and as a result, Oriental esotericism is still better represented in bookshops in the West than its Occidental counterpart. Similarly, the French colonies in North Africa lent esotericism in French-speaking territories a strong Sufi coloring. The partition of Poland in the 19th century caused the spread of that country's alchemical traditions over the rest of Europe. A genuine Rosicrucian impulse survived in the Middle Europe in the form of Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy. The Russian Revolution caused the occultists who had clustered at the court of the czars to flee, helping to introduce a stream of orthodox esotericism in the West, and the Sufi and Orthodox influenced philosophy of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky became very influential in both Europe and America. In the 1950s, China's invasion of Tibet would cause the dispersal of Tibetan esotericism all over the world. At a time when, to many in the West, the organized religion of the state risks being reduced to mere formalism and seems to many to be sterile and exhausted, it would perhaps not be surprising if every intelligent person reaches a time in life when he or she wants to consider the great questions of life and death and whether or not life and the universe has meaning and has to cast about for answers. Esoteric philosophy, taken as a whole, represents the richest, the deepest, and the most fascinating body of thought on these questions. The very greatest artists and writers find ways of expressing what it means to be alive at a moment in history. The great art at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century was, on one level, the cry of a hurt and puzzled humanity. Some artists and writers, including a few very great ones, looked squarely into the face of existence and decided that it was quite meaningless, that life on Earth, human life, is an accident of chemical combinations, and that, as Jean Paul Sartre it concluded at the end of La Noce, the only way life can have meanings is if we choose to devise goals for ourselves. It is true, too, that some artists have taken great pleasure in the material age and its shiny surfaces. Modernism has undoubtedly was undoubtedly iconoclastic. However, by the end of the 19th century, the tyranny of kings, clerical superstitions, and stodgy bourgeoisie, bourgeois morality were pretty soft targets for iconoclasts. For the majority of great artists of the modern era, the mechanical model of the universe has been the icon they really wanted to smash. We like to think of modernism as smart, hip, in tune with the machine age, impatient with the authority and dogma of earlier times. It is all these things, but it is not, as we also sometimes like to think, atheistic, at least not in the radical modern sense of atheistic. In fact, if you like to see esotericism as the refuge of ancient superstition, then that is what modernism really is. The great unifying spirit of modernism, the spirit that unites Picasso, Joyce, Malevich, Gaudi, Baez, Borges, and Calvino, is a desire to undermine and subvert the prevailing scientific materialism. It needs a little probing into the lives of these artists and writers to see that they were all deeply involved in the occult and that esotericism provided them with their core philosophy of life and guided aesthetic. If we have Baudelaire and Rimbaud as representative starting points for modernism, it is all too easy to interpret the derangement of the senses they recommend as ends in themselves. What they really believed was that when the material world is dissolved, the lineaments of the world, the lineaments of the spirit worlds will present themselves. Quote, the poet makes himself clairvoyant, end quote. Oh, that's not the end of the quote. Let me start that quote again. The poet makes himself clairvoyant, said Rimbaud, by turning all meaning upside down in a long and reasoned manner, end quote. Gauguin, I'm not sure if that's Gauguin, Um, Munch, Klee, and Mondrian were theosophists. Mondrian's theosophy taught him it was possible to discern a spiritual reality structuring the appearances of the material world. Gauguin saw himself as, or Gauguin, maybe, I don't know, saw himself as creating sculptures much which like golems, could be enlivened by disembodied spirits. Kandinsky, like Franz Marc, was a disciple of Rudolf Steiner's, but the great formative influences on Kandinsky's paintings leading the way into abstraction were the quote unquote thought forms perceived in a trance state and recorded by theosophists Annie Besant and C.W. Ledbetter. Klee depicted himself meditating on the third eye. Malevich was in thrall to Ouspensky. The esoteric roots of Matisse's art may be better hidden, but he said that sometimes he looked at an object, such as a plant he intended to paint, for weeks, even months, until its spirit began to urge him to give it expression. Gaudi's Arab-influenced architecture, flamboyantly surging arabesques in which animal and human forms merge and morph into each other, invites this visitor to walk into an altered state of consciousness. Spain is perhaps the country in Europe where the supernatural lies closest to the surface of the everyday. Picasso, the great artist magus of modernism, always had a strong feeling for the intrusions of the spirit worlds. As a boy, he was believed by some of his friends to have supernatural abilities like mind reading and prophecy. When he traveled to France, Max Jacob, Eric Satie, Apollinaire, Georges Bataille, Jean Cocteau, and others initiated him into a sophisticated occult tradition. Picasso often used esoteric themes in his work. Sometimes he painted himself as the Harlequin. This figure is associated with Hermes in the underworld, particularly in his native Barcelona, where Harlequin's victory over death is reenacted annually in street carnivals. His friend Apollinaire sometimes referred to him as Harlequin Trismegistus, quote unquote. At other times, he portrayed himself in terms of an image from the tarot suspended between the material world and the spirit worlds. In an analysis of a 1934 drawing of a Spanish bullfight, a long overlooked work, Mark Harris highlights the theme of Parsifal. His essay is an inspiring example of the way that esoteric thought can illuminate dimensions closed to conventional criticism. In his youth, Picasso had become a founder member of a group called Valhalla, formed to study the mystical aspects of Wagner. The drawing depicts the scene in Wagner's opera when the black magician hurls the spear of Longinus at Parsifal, but because Parsifal is now initiated, it only hovers over his head. Georges Bataille researched Mithraism, and in 1901 Picasso made a series of paintings depicting women wearing a Mithraic cap, a traditional symbol of initiation. The 1934 drawing, Harris convincingly shows, is a portrayal of an underworld initiation. Like Dante and Dostoevsky before him, he shows that the hell that the candidate must traverse begins with the hell of his own desires. Hell lies with Hell lies the other side of the grave, but this life is hellish too, and hellish according to the temper of the times. This drawing is a depiction of one of Picasso's grand themes. Our world is being shattered, fragmented by an eruption of evil subterranean forces. The initiatic artist, Picasso, can remake the world, can be a fertility god reborn, but he will do it Not in terms of the conventional canons of beauty. He will recombine the discarded, the shattered, the ugly in beautiful new ways. The abstract and conceptual painter Yves Klein discovered esoteric thought when he chanced upon a book by the modern proponent of Rosicrucian philosophy, Max Heindel, who had been initiated by Rudolf Steiner but broke away to set up his own Rosicrucian movement. Looking forward to the transfiguration of matter, Klein intended his art to inaugurate a new age of space, depicted in canvases of ultramarine, unbroken by line or form. In his new age, human spirit, free of the restrictions of matter and form, would levitate and float. The great writers of the 20th century were deeply immersed in esoteric thought, too, inspired by rumors about William Blake and his sexual religion. W.B. Yeats and his young wife, Georgie, explored first the direct link between sexual and spiritual union to be found in the Zohar, then Tantric Yoga. Yeats even had a vasectomy in the hope that stemming the flow of semen would help build up the energies needed for a visionary trance. Not only did their experiments produce more than 4,000 pages of spirit inspired automatic writing, but Yeats remained sexually rejuvenated into old age and wrote some of his most magnificent poetry then. He described, quote, the love that moves the sun, end quote. Yeats was also a member of both the Order of the Golden Dawn and the Theosophical Society, studied the Hermetica, wrote openly about magic, and an introduction to a popular edition of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Joyce's Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake show his familiarity with Hindu and Hermetic doctrine, including direct quotes from Swedenborg, Madame Blavatsky, and Eliphas Levi. The poetry of T.S. Eliot also uses occult references in an eclectic way. Eliot attended Theosophist meetings, and the breakaway quest group attended by Ezra Pound, Wyndham Lewis, and Gershom Scholem, the great scholar of Jewish mysticism. But perhaps the formative influence on his poetic sensibility was the Sufi-inspired philosophy of Ouspensky, whose lectures he also attended. In fact, the famous first three lines of perhaps the most influential poem in English in the 20th century, Four Quartets, on time past and time future contained in time present, are a paraphrase of the philosophy of Ouspensky. Hey Vesper, how's it going? We're 14 pages into the second to last chapter here. Um, this chapter's been kind of bouncing around. I'm doing pretty good. I am looking forward to the end of this book, to be honest. Um, I am enjoying it, but getting this far into it, I'm anxious to be done. And so I put a what's the word I'm looking for? I put a poll up on X for the next four books. So feel free to vote on that. There's one on Rosicrucians, one on slavery. There's one on Graham Hancock, Fingerprints of the Gods. So theories on um, older civilizations and stuff. And then there's one called Trust Me, I'm Lying, which is interesting. Confessions of a Media Manipulator. That's what that one is. So that's the four that are on there. Like I said, feel free to check out the books and decide which one you would like to hear me read. Where was I? Ah, here we go. Philosophy of Ouspensky. The slavery one is the second one that I'll have read by David Bryan Davis. It's called The Problem of Slavery in the Age of Revolution. So the first one was that I read was The Problem of Slavery in Western Culture, where he kind of gives an overview of slavery in the West, not just America, but a lot in the Caribbean, Brazil. Um, really wasn't a lot of slavery going on in Europe anymore at that by that point. It was always in the colonies of all the European countries where the slavery was heaviest. But um, so this one will be during the not just the American Revolution, but the French Revolution and slavery and how it was treated and that during that time period. So it should be an interesting read. The first one was fascinating. Okay, you voted. All right. Okay, let's get back to this so we can finish this book up. Perhaps the most occult writer of the 20th century. Oop, what? Whatever happened to the reading? Oh yeah, I. It's still on the list. I just um, these are the four books that are kind of interesting me at the moment. So I'm still gonna read Plato. I'll try to get it on the farther up the list. It just didn't quite make it this time around. Gotta respect the fathers of wisdom. Yes, we do. Okay. Um, Perhaps the most occult writer of the 20th century and the one who best lived up to Rimbaud's dictum about becoming a medium was Fernando Pessoa. He wrote of holding inside himself all the dreams of the world and wanting to experience the whole of the universe, its reality, inside himself. He awaited the return of the hidden one who has himself been waiting since the beginning of time. Meanwhile, Pessoa emptied himself like a medium, allowing himself to be taken over by a series of personae under whose names he wrote different series of poems with very different voices. Quote, I am the cleverness in the dice, says an ancient Taoist text. I am the active in the deeds, says the Gnostic hymn of the pearl. So those were two short quotes, sorry. Pessoa recognized these sentiments. To move things in space and time, to make the world better, it is not enough to push as hard as we can. We need the spirits to work through us. We need some of that spirit of cleverness. In the literature of the late 20th century, Borges, Calvino, Salinger, and Singer also deal openly with esoteric themes. It is as if they work in accord with Karlheinz, Karlheinz Stockhausen's assertion that all genuine creation makes conscious something from the esoteric realm that has not been made conscious before. Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy has been extremely influential, not only on Kandinsky, Mark, and Beuys, but also on William Golding and Doris Lessing, both of whom lived in this is a tough one. It's a combination of anthropology and theosophy. Anthroposophical communities. It is a mark of the strange way that esoteric influences spread that too much, to such different writers as C.S. Lewis and Saul Bellow were both instructed in esoteric philosophy by the same spiritual master, the anthroposophist Owen Barfield. Will it always be true to say that the greatest writers of the day are interested in esoteric ideas? We can certainly see the influence of esotericism on both Bellow and John Updike, the two leading novelists writing in English at the turn of the century. Some of Bellow's correspondence with Barfield has been published. Updike has written an overtly occult novel in The Witches of Eastwick, but perhaps more telling is this passage from his latest novel, Villages. Quote, sex is a programmed delirium that rolls back death with death's own substance. It is the black space between the stars given sweet substance in our veins and crevice. The parts of ourselves conventional decency calls shameful are exalted. We are told that we shine, that we are exalted. End quote. This passage reaches right into the heart of the issue that lies between the exoteric worldview and its opposite. According According to the esoteric thinkers, life in a mechanized, industrialized, digitized environment has a deadening effect on our mental processes. The concrete, the plastic, the metal, the electrical impulses bouncing off the screen become internalized, resulting in a sterile wasteland that does not regenerate itself. A conscious shift in consciousness is needed to open ourselves up again to the free-flowing, revivifying influence of the spirit worlds. In 1789, the armies of angels led by St. Michael won a victory in heaven. In order for this victory to be decisive, though, it would have to be fought again on earth. On 28 June 1914, Rasputin was overtaken by the plot to kill him. On the very same day, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated. All hell let loose. Much has been written about the evil occult influences on Germany in the early 20th century. Less well known is the story of the occult influences in Russia at the time of the Revolution. We have already touched on St. Martin, Papus, and Rasputin. What is very little known is the occult influence behind their enemies, the revolutionary communists. As I have already suggested, Marxism can be seen as a materialistic reframing of the fraternal ideals of Freemasonry. The revolutionary cell structure instigated by Lenin and Trotsky was closely modeled on the working methods of Weishaupt. Marx, Engels, and Trotsky were Freemasons. Lenin was a Freemason of the 31st degree, a member of several lodges, including the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, the most important lodge to have been infiltrated by the followers and nihilistic philosophy of the Illuminati. Lenin and Trotsky waged war on God. Okay, we have a picture, not a very clear one, but we'll show it anyway, and it's got a fairly long caption. It says, like Augustus, like James I, Hitler persecuted occultists because he believed in them, not because he didn't. One of the most learned occultists of the day, Franz Barden, was arrested with one of his disciples by the SS. There's a story that while they were being beaten, the disciple lost control and shouted out a Kabbalistic formula that froze his torturers. When the spell was broken, the disciple was shot. Barden worked professionally as a stage magician. The idea of the stage magician, who also turns out to be a real occultist, was portrayed by Thomas Mann in his story Mario and the Magician, and here in the film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Okay, so this is a picture from the film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And there you have it. Not sure of the relevance, but I mean, okay, in the film, I guess he was a real occultist, but whatever. Anyway, getting back to it. But there is a deeper mystery here. How was a man like Lenin able to bend millions of people to his will? This seems to go beyond the sinister strategies of Weishaupt. The U.S. military research into occult ways of gaining advantage over the Soviet Union has been well documented. Key personnel have given testimony which seems authentic, though the results seem to have been pretty limited. What is only now beginning to emerge is the much more extreme and successful use of the occult by government agencies of the old Soviet Union. Some reluctant initiates have survived to speak of, quote, the red initiation, end quote, of the training to become secret agents which took place in former monasteries. It seems that occult techniques were employed to strengthen the will to a supernatural degree by exploiting the psychic energies of torture victims and sacrificial victims too. Only someone who had killed in the cause could become a red initiate. Of course, we have seen this form of black magic before in the pyramid culture of South America. In the secret history, Lenin is a reincarnation of a high priest born again in order to oppose the second coming of the sun god, and when Trotsky was on the run from his old comrades hiding in Mexico City, he was returning home. The image of Lenin, the mummified incarnation of an initiate of the pyramids, is both resonant and a little absurd to modern sensibility. Ironically, perhaps, this image seems to encapsulate the very spirit of modernism, mixing the iconic with the offbeat, of the cheap, banal, even tackily up to date with ancient occult wisdom. There has been some debate in occult circles as to how such esoteric wisdom should be made public, how much is useful in the war against materialism, and how much is dangerous. We return to India, where post Atlantean history began. As we approach the end of this history, we are in a good position to see how far humanity has evolved from the communally minded creature of earlier times who had little awareness of the world around him and little sense of an interior life. In Gandhi, we see individual free thought, free will, and free love. Here is someone who has so expanded his sense of self that he is able to make turning points in his own personal story, his own interior narrative, into turning points in world history. Gandhi stands as a great embodiment of the new form of consciousness that the secret societies have been working throughout history to help evolve. It is perhaps a small irony, as well as being a mark of the global reach of the secret societies, that coming from the land of the rishis, Gandhi first learned esoteric ideas from the Russian, English, Egyptian, American hybrid theosophy as taught by Madame Blavatsky. As a young man, Gandhi described himself as in love with the British Empire. Being naturally good-hearted, he saw the best in the upright and fair-playing Britons who administered his native country as a colony. But as he matured, he began to see a deeper reality. Beneath the much vaunted fair play, he saw, for example, the unfairness of the tax burden from abroad, and above all, India's lack of freedom to determine her own destiny. Influenced in part by the philosophy of disobedience of the American transcendentalist Henry Thoreau and by the art of the social critic John Ruskin, Gandhi set about turning the world upside down and inside out. In 1906, at the age of 36, Gandhi renounced sex with his wife. His spiritual discipline involved daily work on a hand-spun spinning wheel, partly to encourage a method of weaving cloth that would provide employment for the poor, but also because he believed that as he worked on the cloth, he was also working on his own vegetable body. If he could master his body in its different dimensions, he could develop what he called soul force. He believed that the cosmos is governed by truth and by the laws of truth, and that by acting in accordance with these laws, an individual would gain satyagraha. Okay, let me try that again. Satyagraha, the force of truth and love. I'm going to need you to quit casting aspersions towards Canada geese. They are loving creatures. I don't know. Say they can be, but they can also be real jackasses. I'll try to keep my aspersions to myself from now on. Best guard animals. Yeah. Yeah, my experience is they tend to guard the wrong thing, though. All right. For example, if you trust your opponent without fail, you will eventually influence him to act in a trustworthy way, both by means both by means of a psychological influence, but also crucially by means of a supernatural one. Similarly, if attacked, you should try to be free from all thoughts of anger and hatred against your assailant. Follow this philosophy, Gandhi taught, and, quote, you will be free of fear of kings, people, robbers, tigers, even death, end quote. In the upside down thinking typical of the secret societies, Gandhi blamed Indians, not Britons, for the occupation of India, pointing out that 100,000 Britons would not be able to control 300 million Indians unless they went along with it. Indian cotton was being exported to Britain, to the textile mills of Lancashire, then sold back to India at a profit to Britain and a loss to India. Seated at his spinning wheel, he said, quote, it's my certain conviction that with every thread I draw, I am spinning the destiny of India, end quote. What's that? They use other geese in Brazil to guard prisons because they cannot be bribed. Not even with a bag of bread. I don't know about that. I don't. I've never met a goose that could pass up bread. On 26 January 1929, he asked people to observe Independence Day in towns and villages throughout India. He asked for the boycotting of law courts, elections, and schools. He also chose to challenge the British government's monopoly on salt manufacture, which meant that Indians had to pay the British for salt even though it lay in open abundance around their own coast. In March 1930, the 60-year-old Gandhi set off, staff in hand, on a 24-day walk to the sea. Thousands joined him. Finally, he waded into the sea for ritual purification, then leaned down and scooped up a small handful of salt. The crowd acclaimed him deliverer. Gandhi's sole power was such that when he met armed soldiers, they would lower their weapons. Hindus and Muslims forgave each other in his presence. The imprisonment of Gandhi and his hunger strikes sapped the moral will of the British government, leading to the independence for India in 1947. The largest empire the world had ever seen melted away with an unprecedented lack of bloodshed. In this history, we have followed the lives of great leaders such as Alexander the Great and Napoleon. In a sense, Gandhi was greater than any of them. Sole force, he believed, could deflect the greatest military power because the intention behind an action could have a greater and more widespread effects than the action itself. Gandhi was a devout Hindu, but he lived according to the deeper laws as laid out in the Sermon on the Mount. Talking to hostile Hindu and Muslim factions, he argued that someone whose spirit of self-sacrifice did not go beyond his own community eventually became selfish and made his community selfish. The spirit of self-sacrifice, he said, should embrace the whole world. Like St. Francis, he loved the whole world. Yeah, 'cause he was a damn hippie. I'm joking, of course. All right, we have one last chapter to wrap up this book. I am going to go get some water very quickly, um, or I'll never make it through the chapter. And then we'll come back and finish it up. And this one's 14 pages. It's a fairly short chapter. So I'll be right back. Okay, let's get back to this. Last chapter. So, this one, um, the title is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the Antichrist, Re-entering the Ancient Wood, the Maitreya Buddha, the Opening of the Seven Seals, the New Jerusalem. So, like I said, it's only 14 pages, and it's got some interest. That's an interesting picture right off the bat. Alrighty, well, I'll show you when we get there. It's on the second page of the. So here we go. It is only in this obscure suburb of history where nothing miraculous ever seems to happen and no great geniuses live, this age when the standards of education of the educated classes is in deep decline. It is only in this time and place that people have held matter before mind beliefs. In all other places, at all other times, people believed the contrary. They would have found it just about impossible to imagine how anyone could believe what we do. According to the secret history, this change has been caused by a change in consciousness. In the esoteric account, consciousness changes much more quickly and in a much more radical way than in the conventional account. I hope this book has gone some way to showing that if people believed in a mind before matter philosophy a few generations ago, it was not because they'd weighed up the arguments on both sides and plumped for idealism. It was because they experienced the world in an idealistic way. Consider finally how your consciousness is different from your parents' consciousness. Yours is probably more liberal, more sympathetic, more able to appreciate the point of view of other races, classes, gender, sexual tastes, and so on. In some ways, you are probably more aware of yourself because Freud's ideas have percolated down so thoroughly you are less likely to remain unaware of the underlying sexual motivations for your impulses, or or you're aware that Freud was a freak. He was a sex freak, and that influenced his thinking greatly. Or of commercial motivations because of Marx. You were probably less repressed, less fearful of authority, more questioning, and have less strong family ties. You probably tell lies more readily, have weaker powers of concentration, and less determination to stick at boring tasks for the sake of a long-term goal. Although popular culture pays much lip service to romantic love, you, along with most people, probably don't believe in it wholeheartedly anymore. Few would want or expect to with stay with the same sexual partner for a lifetime. In fact, as Rilke suggested in the Notebooks of Malte Lauritz-Brigg, part of you wants to run from the responsibility that being loved brings. Okay. I can tell I am not on the same wavelength as this guy in some things. All right. So going to this picture, it's a strange one. It's called the caption is The Antichrist by Luca Signorelli, a detail from the San Brizio Chapel in Orvieto Cathedral. Signorelli worked with Botticelli on the Sistine Chapel and was also, like Leonardo, a member of the studio of Verrocchio, maybe, whose own work is replete with esoteric references. Mayan astronomer priests pinpointed the incarnation of Lucifer to 13 August 3114 BC, tying in close with the Hindu traditions of the dawn of the Dark Age. These same priests predicted a similar turning point in history, the closing of one great cycle and the start of another on 22 December AD 2012. Okay, so here we have the Antichrist. There you go. Make of it what you will. Okay. Our consciousness then is different from our parents' consciousness, and it is also probably very different from our grandparents' consciousness. Project this rate of change back into history, and it becomes easy to see how only a few generations ago, everyday waking consciousness might have been like the form of consciousness we experience in dreams. It also raises the question, how will our consciousness change in the near future? In the mind before matter view, mind created the physical universe precisely with the aim of nurturing human consciousness and helping it to evolve. So what does it say about how our consciousness will change? Okay, we're supposed to be in an ad and it's not starting, so I'm going to keep on going. According to esoteric Christianity, Jesus Christ lived on earth in the middle of the history of the cosmos. His life represents the great turning point in history. Everything after it mirrors what happened beforehand, so we are experiencing the great events of pre-Christian times in reverse order, and our future development will take us through earlier stages in reverse order. For example, in AD 2000, our lives mirror the life of Abraham in 2000 BC, walking among the idol- idolatrous skyscrapers of Uruk. Okay, there we're in our ad. So we will hold on until the end of that so that everybody gets to hear all of this. Me butchering this book. And we'll come back. What is this? Chipotle or Qdoba or what is it? Chipotle. We have a new Chipotle in town. Never been to one. So far, not hearing great things. But I'm sure I'll try it one of these days. Okay, we should be coming back here in just a few seconds. Um, Skyscrapers of Uruk. All right. So now that we're back, I'll pick up where we left off. Today's skyscrapers may be taken as representing fundamentalism. On the one hand, there are right-wing Christians whom we should bracket with the cruder forms of Islam. Both want to repress human individual free will and intelligence, to lure us into an unenlightening ecstasy. This is the influence of Lucifer. On the other hand, there is the militant scientific materialism that wants to snuff out the human spirit. Machines are making us machine-like. This is the influence of Satan, who wants to go further and squeeze out our spirit altogether and make us mere matter. And just as Lucifer incarnated, so too Satan will incarnate. He will do so as a writer. His aim will be to destroy spirituality by explaining it away. He will have the ability to create supernatural events, but then know how to give them a reductively scientific explanation. At first, he will appear to be a great benefactor on humankind, a genius. To begin with, he himself may not realize he is the Antichrist, believing he acts only out of love for humanity. He will do away with much dangerous superstition and work to unite the religions of the world. However, there will come a moment of pride when he realizes he is achieving some things that Jesus Christ was apparently unable to achieve. He will then become aware of his identity and his mission. How to recognize Satan, or any false prophet, or any false purportedly spiritual teaching. False teaching usually has little or no moral dimension. The benefits of reawakening the chakras, for example, being recommended merely in terms of selfish personal growth. True spiritual teachings put love of others and love of humanity at its heart, intelligent love freely given. Beware too of teaching that doesn't invite questioning or tolerate mockery. It is telling you in effect that God wants you to be stupid. This book has accumulated evidence to show that throughout history, highly intelligent people have immersed themselves in esoteric philosophy. They have used secret techniques to work themselves into altered states in which they can access an abnormally high level of intelligence. The evidence shows that the groups involved in these societies were concerned to help forge new, more highly intelligent forms of consciousness. Esoteric thinking has had a great determining influence on human development that these days is almost wholly overlooked. Okay, I see Vesper, you put something else there. Um, Ask for the fajita mix when they make your food if you like onions and peppers. Oh, you're talking. Oh, yeah, for Chipotle. Yeah, I'll go in there eventually, but the people that I know that have gone there were not impressed with it. But I'm not exactly certain I agree with their tastes anyway. So I'm going to give it a chance. Go in open-minded. Um, oh crap. Where did I leave off? Oh, okay. No. Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry, I lost my place there for a second when I went to answer you. I stopped at a good stopping point and then lost that point. According to this way of thinking, humans once had unhindered access to the spirit worlds. Then this access became obscured and dimmed as matter hardened. Now the barrier between ourselves and the spirit worlds is becoming thinner again. The material world is fraying and becoming threadbare. We may begin to become more aware of the patterns suggested by coincidences and the synchronicities we experience. We may begin to see in these the outline of deeper laws. We may become less quick to presume that our intuitions, our brilliant ideas, are our own, and more open to the suggestion that they might be otherworldly promptings, as well as become aware that we may be prompted by disembodied intelligence. We may realize that too, we may realize too that we are connected with one another more directly through thinking than we are through speech and physical observation. We may develop a heightened sense that our interaction with other people is a far more mysterious process than we routinely suppose. In the future, we may also learn to look at relationships in terms of reincarnation. We may come to appreciate the relationships in previous incarnations may account for subconscious feelings of liking and disliking which rise up when we meet strangers. Naturally, all this seems mad from a commonsensical point of view. There is no room anywhere in a scientific materialist universe for these sorts of musings. But the scientific materialist view has its limitations, as I have tried to suggest. When it comes to contemplating such far flung events as the beginning of the universe, it is inevitable that huge amounts of speculation are mapped on to the smallest conceivable specks of evidence. Leading physicists, cosmologists, and philosophers speculations on infinite interlocking dimensions, parallel universes, and soap bubble universes involve just as much imagination as Aquinas's speculations about angels on a pinhead. Okay, some of these sentences. All right. The point is that when it comes to the biggest questions, people are again not necessarily choosing according to the balance of the probabilities, which may be almost too small to measure. The world is like the perspective picture that can equally well be seen as a witch or a pretty young girl. People often choose one worldview in preference to another because somewhere in the depths of their being, that is what they want to believe. If we can learn to become conscious of this predisposition, we can make a decision which is, to that extent, free because it is a decision based on knowledge. The part of us somewhere in our depths that wants to believe in a mechanical materialist universe may, on reflection, not be the part of ourselves we want to determine our fate. Know thyself, commanded the sun god. The techniques taught in ancient times in the mystery schools and in modern times by groups like the Rosicrucians are intended to help us become aware of the rhythm of our breaths, our hearts, our sexual rhythms, the rhythm of waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep. If we can consciously attune our own individual rhythms to the rhythms of the cosmos measured by Hakim and Boaz, it is suggested we may eventually join our individual evolutions with the evolution of the cosmos. This would be to find meaning in life in meaning's highest sense. Esoteric philosophy calls for a rediscovery of the spiritual hierarchies ranged above us, and ultimately connected with that, a discovery of the divine capabilities ranged within us. This was the secret preserved and nurtured by geniuses as diverse as Plato, St. Paul, Leonardo, Shakespeare, and Newton. Okay, then we have a four-part list, numbered list. I'll read off. 1. If you can think so deeply that you can rediscover the spiritual roots of thought, if you can recognize thoughts as living spiritual beings. 2. If you can develop a strong enough sense of your own individuality that you can become aware of your interaction with the thought beings that weave in and out of yourself, yet not be overwhelmed by this reality. 3. If you can recreate the ancient sense of wonder and use this sense of wonder to help awaken the willpower that lies sleeping in your deep, dark recesses. 4. If the fire of love for your fellow human beings rises from your heart and causes you to weep tears of compassion, then, and this is in answer to all four of those, then you have been working on the four elements. You have begun the process of their transformation. I don't agree with that, all of that, but we'll carry on. This is the mysterious fourfold work also alluded to by St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 13. Quote, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, love, these three, but the greatest of these is love." End quote. Intuition is transformed intellect that perceives the spiritual beings as real. Paul calls this faith. Okay, then we have a picture, and the caption is Allegory by Leonardo da Vinci. As an initiate of the secret philosophy, Leonardo understood the spiritual exercises involving work on the four elements to which St. Paul alludes. The creature on the left is not a wolf, as the catalogue of the Queen's collection states, but a bull. Okay, show you that picture, and yeah, I mean, it's obvious that's a bull. I can see the freaking horns. Why would they think that's a wolf? There we go. Leonardo, the bull sailing toward with the tree of life, I would expect, sprouting up from his boat, sailing toward, what is that? The world and the phoenix? I'm not sure. Okay, moving on. Wonder is transformed feeling, feeling that has become aware of the spiritual workings of the cosmos, but is not overwhelmed by them. Paul calls this hope. Conscience is transformed will, when by the exercise of thought and imagination, faith and hope, we have begun to transform that part of ourselves, including the willpower that lives beneath the threshold of consciousness. Paul calls this charity or love. By applying faith to hope and by applying faith and hope to love, a human being may then be transformed into an angel. So the scorpion is transformed into an eagle. The eagle works with the bull, and the bull grows wings. The winged bull works on the lion so that it grows wings in its turn. And the end of this fourfold process is that the winged lion works on the man so that he is transformed into an angel. This is a great mystery taught in the mystery centers of the ancient world, which became the great mystery of esoteric Christianity. The four elements play a crucial role in the formation of the physical universe, and to work on them as they weave in and out of us is to transform not just ourselves, but the whole universe, even to its outer limits. If an individual cries tears of compassion, his animal nature is to some extent transformed, but so too are the cherubim that occupy and interweave throughout the whole cosmos. Changes in human physiology become seeds of the transfiguration of the entire material universe. The the Kabbalist Isaac Luria wrote that eventually there will be no single atom that has not been worked on by man. Okay. In the early chapters of this history, we saw how the world and humanity were created in the following order. First, the mineral part, second, the vegetable, third, the animal, and last, as the crown of creation, the distinctly human element. Constituent parts were nurtured one after the other, each providing the conditions for the succeeding stage to develop. As the later stages of history progress, these parts will be transformed in reverse order: human, animal, vegetable, and lastly mineral. At the end of time, even the very atoms of our material natures will be transformed like the physical body of Jesus Christ in the transfiguration. As we have seen, that according to the secret history, humanity is only briefly dipped into matter, that the hardening of the earth and of our skulls has enabled us to evolve a proper sense of self, and so the potential to think, will, and love freely. But before this brief sojourn among physical objects, our experience was of ideas, the objects of our imagination, which we conceived of as coming from spirits, angels, and gods, were real to us. For the greater part of human history, even long after matter had been formed, what we saw in the mind's eye was still more real to us than material objects. The lesson of modern history is that matter is being transformed, dispersed, so that in the not too distant future we will re enter the realm of imagination. Okay, and then we have another picture. It has a short caption this time. The opening of the fifth seal by El Greco. This revivifying of the chakras is what is meant in Revelation by the opening of the seals. Okay. So the opening of the fifth seal. Where are they getting fifth seal out of that? That I don't know. Don't get how that's the fifth seal. Anyway, um, if it's the fifth chakra of the seven main chakras, which actually there are hundreds of chakras in theory. I don't know what they're getting at. Anyway, that's what he called it. So okay, here we go. When will this happen? What will happen after the incarnation of Satan? In chapter 4, we saw that in the mind before matter understanding, history is divided into 7 days, quote unquote days. Saturday was the rule of Saturn. Sunday was the age when the earth was united with the sun. Monday was the age before the moon departed. Tuesday was the age that started with the locking into place of the fixed material world in 11,145 BC. The death of Jesus Christ marked the halfway point in Tuesday and the Great Week. What will happen in the rest of the week? In AD 3574, we will enter the age called Philadelphia in Revelation. In the great evolutionary impulses of previous eras have come from India, Persia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, and Northern Europe. The next impulse will come from Eastern Europe and Russia. Freemasonic influenced governments in America and Britain have been keen to involve themselves in this area of the world for this reason. Already it is possible to see extremes emanating from this area, both extremes of spirituality and extremes of evil, such as the Russian mafia, quote unquote mafia. In future personalities, we remember from history the great personalities who helped lead humanity out of the spirit worlds will be reborn in order to lead us back into the spirit worlds. There will be a new Shakespeare, a new Moses, a new Zarathustra, a new Hercules. Toward the end of the Philadelphian era, Jesus Pandira, the teacher of the Essenes, will incarnate again as, quote, the fifth rider who rides a horse called faithful and true, end quote, referred to in Revelation. In Oriental tradition, this figure is called the Maitreya Buddha. He will bring great spiritual gifts, opening what St. Teresa of Avila called the eyes of the soul, the chakras. Is that Avila? It's only got one L in it, so maybe it's Avila. St. Teresa of Avila. That sounds more correct. We will then re-enter the sacred wood described in chapter 2. We will be aware of the spirits, then angels and gods, alive in everything around us, but we will not be controlled by them anymore. We will become aware again of the spiritual beings ranged on either side of us whenever we make a decision. As good and evil spirits make themselves felt, as everyone communicates more freely with the spirit worlds, organized religion will no longer be needed. Imagine no religion. Here we go with John Lennon. We will regain some of the ability to control animals and plants by the power of our thoughts that Adam enjoyed. We will begin to remember past lives and to foresee the future. Our waking consciousness will develop so that it bears the same relationship to our present day waking consciousness as today's waking consciousness bears to our dreaming consciousness. We will realize that although we have believed ourselves to be awake, we have actually been asleep. These developments will be hard won. At the end of the Philadelphian era, there will be a catastrophic world war, at the end of which the surface of the earth will become a spiritual wasteland, except for America, where the flame of spirituality will be kept alive. This will be the mirror image of the period of the first Zarathustra. The period AD 5734 through 7894 is called Laodicea in Revelation. As matter becomes less dense, so our bodies will respond more and more to spiritual impulses. The goodness in good people will shine out of them, while the faces and bodies of evil people will be molded by the animal passions that dominate them. Good people will find it increasingly hard to be happy if they are surrounded by people who are miserable. Eventually, no one will be happy until everyone is happy. Let the beatings commence until morale improves. If the material world is brief, so too is death. In time, we will no longer die but sleep very deeply and then less and less deeply. Death, as St. Paul says, will be swallowed up. As we enter another age of metamorphosis, biological generation too will eventually become unnecessary. We will discover the, quote, word that has been lost, end quote, of the Freemasons, which is to say we will be able to create by power of the voice. In the scheme of the Great Week, we'll have moved into Thursday, though of course time as we understand it today will no longer exist. Our thoughts will take on a life of their own, working on our behalf but independently of us. As history approaches its end, the forces of evil will assert themselves once more as the third being in the trinity of evil, Sorath, the sun demon, possesses God's intentions. opposes God's intentions. This is the beast with two horns like a lamb's described in Revelation. He will lead the forces of evil in the last battle. Eventually, not only will the sun come up differently, as St. John Chrysostom predicted, but a sun will rise up inside each of us. All of this will have been accomplished by the power of thought. By and large, the people who have most changed history have not been the great generals or politicians, but the artists and thinkers. An individual sitting alone in a room and giving birth to an idea can do more to change the course of history than a general who commands thousands on the field of battle or a political leader who commands the loyalty of millions. This is the romance and excitement of philosophy. In a mind before matter universe, there is more than romance and excitement in all thinking. There is magic too. It is not just what I do or say, but what I think that affects my fellow humans and the whole course of history. Plato said that all philosophy begins with wonder. Modern science is killing off wonder by telling us what we know that we know it all. Modern science is killing off philosophy by encouraging us not to ask the big why questions. These questions are strictly meaningless, they say. Just get on with it. Today's scientists try to insist that theirs is the only way to interpret the basic conditions of human existence. They like to dwell on what they know. In their view, the known is like a vast continent occupying nearly everything there is. The men and women who have been described making history in this book have preferred to dwell on what they don't know. In their view, the known is a tiny island floating on a vast and very strange sea. I agree with them. Let us sow the seeds of doubt. Let us take Francis Bacon's advice and refrain from rushing to impose a pattern on the world. Let us wait with Keats at our shoulder for a deeper pattern to emerge. Science is not certain. Yeah, it's ever changing. That's the nature of science. It is a myth like any other, representing what people in the deepest parts of themselves want to believe. Rudolf Steiner once said that people who don't have the courage to be cruel often develop cruel beliefs. To propose that we don't live in a reciprocal universe is needlessly cruel. If we accept these cruel views, we are allowing the say-so of experts in their own field to take precedence over our own personal experience. We are also denying things that Shakespeare, Cervantes, and Dostoevsky are telling us are true. The aim of this book, therefore, has been to suggest that if we take a fresh look at the basic conditions of our existence, they may perhaps be seen in a radically new way. In fact, they may be seen in a way that is nearly completely the opposite of what we have been brought up to believe. This is what philosophy does, if it is done well. The remains of an ancient wisdom lie all around us in the names of the days of the week and the months of the year, in the arrangement of the pips in an apple, and in the strangeness of mistletoe, in music, in the stories we tell our children, and in the design of many public buildings and statues, and in our greatest art and literature. If we can't see this ancient wisdom, it is because we have been conditioned not to. We have been bewitched by materialism. Science sees idealism as having dominated history up until the 17th century, when the process of discrediting it began. Science assumes materialism will remain the dominant philosophy until the end of time. In the view of the secret societies, materialism will come to be seen as a mere blip. The teachings of the secret societies have here been pulled out into the light of day for the first time. Readers may find them laughable, but at least on the basis of knowing what they really are. Other readers may sense something in them, even though they seem completely incompatible with the great scientific certainties of our age. This has been a visionary history, history as it is retained in the human psyche, a night history preserved by adepts able to slip from the material dimension into another one. It might seem incompatible with the history you have been brought up to believe in, but maybe it is true in other dimensions. Perhaps we should end by considering the musings of a great scientist. The physicist Niels Bohr, or yeah, said, quote, "The opposite of a correct statement is a false statement, but the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth," end quote. We have seen that if we try to peer back into the past beyond 11,451 BC, there is very little evidence that science can properly count as hard. Vast, airy constructions of interpretation are balanced precariously on the tiniest bits of data. And of course, the same is true if we try to gaze far into the future, beyond 11,400 AD, for 11,451. The truth is that we must use our imagination when we travel any distance in either direction. When we leave the confines of this little island of matter, we cannot but enter the realms of imagination. Of course, materialists tend to distrust the imagination, associating it with fantasy and illusion. But the secret societies hold an especially exalted view of the imagination. Each individual mind is a protrusion into the material world of one vast cosmic mind, and we must use the imagination to reach back into it and to engage with it. It was using the imagination in this way that made Leonardo, Shakespeare, and Mozart godlike. Imagination is the key. And we have one last picture. I believe there is no caption for it. I believe it is Alice in Wonderland, maybe the original Alice in Wonderland, or something along that line. It kind of seems like that to me. I'll show it to you. Maybe you'll recognize it. And that is actually what ends this chapter and the book. So we are done. That's it. There's a long note on sources and selective bibliography. He went to a lot. He did a lot of research for this. I can't say that I totally agree with him on some of it, but like I don't think some of his conclusions are quite what I would get out of all of the same research. But I haven't done all of the same research he's done. I can see quite a number of books on here I've never even heard of, let alone read. So if he's actually read all of them, um, then my hat's off to him because there's a ton here. Um, I may have to take some screenshots of that bibliography and look for these books. But anyway, um, that is that. We will have figured out our new book by Friday. Right now, it's looking like we have a 50-50 tie between Trust Me, I'm Lying and slavery in the problem of slavery in the Age of Revolution. So I'm looking forward to seeing where we come out on that. So that'll go till roughly midday or mid-afternoon on Friday, and whatever's got the most votes, that's what we'll go with. And then the next one after that, I'm going to try to get maybe some Plato in there. I really would like to get into some more philosophy, especially if we're going to have Vesper hanging out. He's studied philosophy a lot more than I have anyway. So, all right. I'm going to call it there. Um, and I will see you maybe tomorrow night. I'm not sure. I'm trying to get back into my schedule um, with my other readings, but I just can't seem to quite get kick-started back into it. So tomorrow night should be Forgotten Realms reading if I can get myself to do it. Get my schedule kind of back on track. We'll get back to Star Wars and Forgotten Realms at least one night a week. So, see you then. Have a good night.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. Just tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but it's over. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. Just tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but it's over.